Alrighty, folks. So we are back in. We're going to go ahead and kick off. We're back on the safety technology book. Welcome back from the break. We are going to start off on module 2. Now we're going to be at module 75207, which is page 7.1. Okay, 7.1. We're going to talk a little bit about emergency action plans for a little bit. Okay, so when we're talking about emergency action plans, right, folks, we have to properly prepare for any type of emergency in the workplace, right? Anything that may lead to an injury, illness, or fatality to, or being caused, that may have caused an injury, illness, or fatality to an employee, and there's different reasons why we may have to evacuate, right? And these are the areas that OSHA and NCCER have identified, and may be related to a personal injury. It may be the release of a toxic gas. A lot of times it may be like an ammonium leak, chlorine leak, H2S leak, right? Release, it could be any of those. It also could be a chemical spill. It could be related to fires, explosions, trench cave-ins, confined space incidents or accidents, and then incidents or accidents that come from extreme heights, right? Where somebody may have fell off of an elevated work surface or a ladder, uh, a catwalk or something like that, or off of a tank or whatever the case may be. So basically, OSHA basically states that we have to have an emergency action plan in place. And what that action plan is going to primarily do is it's going to go ahead and cut down on the response time to the job site. So in many cases, advanced planning, it can minimize or it can reduce the severity of the accident, right? So let's use an example, right? If the names, addresses, and phone numbers, right, of the nearest medical and fire personnel and emergency responders agencies are posted at each job site, it's easier to get in touch with the help that we need. Now, it may not just be 911, right? We may be calling our own rescue team, or we may be calling our own emergency action personnel or fire brigade. And then, of course, if we have radios, great. And if not, we need to have cell phone numbers readily available in order to adequately communicate, or it could be a public announcement system, right? A PA system as well. Okay. So it could be needing any of those contact information, having it readily available. Also, as part of the, whether I say EAP or emergency action plan, we're talking about the same thing, folks, right? So an EAP, also, we have to have reporting and response procedures as well. We have to have adequate for reporting the emergency, and then for response, right? If we need any medical care, first aid, fire or rescue personnel, or whatever the case may be. And then EAP is also should also require that at least 2 people on each job site be trained in basic first aid, okay, on and CPR. OSHA mandates that for rescue teams, we have to have at least one person anytime we're dealing with high voltage electricity, or anytime that we're dealing with a rescue team. We have to have at least one person trained in first aid and CPR at all times on the rescue team or when working around high voltage electricity. Now, anytime there's in the absence of an infirmary, basically meaning there's no nearby hospital or there's no nearby EMS services, and then we must always have at least one person trained in first aid, CPR, and AED. And that person has to be trained and willing to provide it as well. Okay, I'm not in agreement. I'm more in agreement with like NCCR, where we should have at least two. And to be honest with you, if it's a job that's so critical, right, or a rescue team, or working around high voltage electricity, I think that we should have everybody involved. Go ahead and be trained. At a minimum, all the rescue personnel, and then anytime working with electricity, all employees trained on basic first aid, CPR, and preferably AED as well. Okay. Basically, we are required to maintain and have an effective EAP, an active emergency action plan. Management's got to show support for the program and the importance of the emergency planning. So if management's not interested, right, in employee protection or minimizing property loss, and then little can be done to promote that workplace safety. So, therefore, it's management's responsibility to develop and implement the emergency action plan, and it's got to be adapted to specific job sites to meet to be relative to the job site that we're on. Okay, so the input, and support basically of all employees has to be obtained in order to ensure an effective program. And like I said, OSHA actually mandates that we have an emergency action plan. Okay, and we'll talk about the OSHA responsibilities coming up right now in the next few sentences. So The emergency action plans, they should be developed for each job, okay, or they have to be specific for each job. And the section 6 that we skipped tonight, which was the job specific site safety plans that we'll cover on Thursday, that says the same thing, that they have to be specific to the job that they're for. Okay, we can have one global document for the company, and then we have to be specific for each job site that we're going to be working on. The plan has to be developed for each site. It's got to be comprehensive enough to deal with all types of emergencies. When emergency action plans are required by particular OSHA standard, and then the plan has to be in writing. Okay, and basically this is the OSHA standard, and this is what it says. It says that if the company has 10 or fewer employees, that the plan can be spoken rather than written. But if the company has greater than 10 employees, the standard says greater than 10 employees, right, or 10 or fewer, it can be spoken or oral. But if it's got greater than 10 employees, so we're talking about 11 or more, now the program has to be written, and it's also got to be conveyed written as well. Okay, so emergency action plans, they have to have at a minimum the following elements that we're going to talk about. They have to have emergency escape procedures and emergency escape routes and assignments. So basically, let's talk about like floor maps or designs, right, to where knowing where our muster stations are going to be and how to safely evacuate out of the area. Procedures that are going to be followed by employees who remain to perform any type of emergency shutdown work, or you may hear it called an oil and gas ESD, right? Emergency shutdown, or critical operations before they evacuate. So not all employees can immediately evacuate. Some of them will have responsibilities to start shutting down units or shutting down equipment in order to minimize or reduce the risk of any more negative impact. Also, procedures that account for all employees after emergency evacuation has been completed. This is why a lot of times we'll have badging systems now, right? Swiping systems. We'll have check-in and check-out stations as well. Rescue and medical duties for those employees who are to perform them. So basically anybody who's first aid, CPR, or EMS trained. The preferred means for reporting fires and other emergencies. Preferred method is always going to be fire pull stations, calling 911, a PA system. Those are primarily going to be the most preferred. And then the names or regular job titles of persons or departments that are going to be contacted for further information or explanation of the duties under the plan. So we can identify it by people, or we can identify it by position. It may be the shift engineer, right, or the shift superintendent for Unit 106, okay, for that particular emergency or whatever, okay. So it could be by name, or it could be by position with swing work or shift work, basically. The EAP, it's got to address all the potential emergencies that can be expected in the workplace. Therefore, it's going to be necessary to perform a pre-job hazard assessment to determine what type of emergencies could occur, right? But we have to do that anyway, folks. Remember, we always have to do a job hazard analysis. Our job safety analysis is the document that the employees are normally completing, but a job hazard analysis is being done by a competent person in the work site, and basically to be able to determine exactly what we're talking about now, any pre-job hazard assessments, right, to determine what type of emergencies could reasonably happen or occur on that work site. And that's when we come in, like we talked about before, with our engineering, administrative and PPE controls. So let me go and go back to that now. Let me go to the website, folks. Let's see. So hierarchy of controls. Let's see. And we'll come back to the hierarchy of controls. We've talked about multiple times already where, I'm really a proponent of just three. This is the newer one that we see now, like we talked about recently. Now they say it's almost like a 5-tier. I just call it these three here. Let's start from here right now. Level the main thought we should be taking into consideration is an engineering control. Basically, how can we engineer out at hazard? How do we engineer it out? Normally, we either substitute the material for a less hazardous material, okay, or we eliminate the hazard altogether. Okay, so it could be, let's say, a perfect example is asbestos insulation on pipes in a refinery. Well, what are we doing? We're going to use an engineering control. What are we going to do? We're going to either substitute asbestos insulation now for fiberglass insulation, or we may eliminate all the insulation altogether and just remove the insulation, which we know is not possible because of the condensation and also to keep temperature on those and also noise on those pipes. So what happens? We're still going to insulate. So we'll substitute with a less hazardous substance. Okay, both of those are still considered engineering controls, or we may build a structure maybe to maintain and quieten the noise or muffle down the noise as well. Right, different example. And then administrating the hazard out, basically administrating the hazard out. What asbestos would be keeping employees that are not authorized and trained in asbestos remediation out of the area. Anybody who is trained, making sure that, let's say if we're using any type of extraction fans with dust collectors or anything, HEPA filters, and then or carbon filters, and then we'll be bringing that material in, or even if they're hosing down the airborne particulates, since they're holding a hose. So we tell the employees where to stand, depending on airflow and ventilation, or because of they're spraying the particulates down to the ground. Those are both considered an administrative control. And ultimately, what's last? Our last option is PPE, right? So this is the traditional three hierarchy of controls: as engineering, administrative, and then PPE. So we try to exercise as many options as possible with engineering. Then little by little we go down to administrative, and then the few hazards that are left that we have not been able to engineer or administrate out, and then we use PPE in training as well. Okay, and then you can use the 5-tier if you want. Like I said, I really don't use it. Just because I think the 3 is sufficient, and I think it captures the elimination of substitution already. Okay, so just different things that we'd be looking at for any type of hazard. Like I said, I used an example right now of asbestos. It could be silica, it could be a hazardous chemical like benzene, okay, or toluene, hexene. So just depending on the environment, okay, and what the work process being conducted is. And then also other examples for information on chemicals, we have to contact the manufacturer. I'm back at 7.2, folks. The manufacturer, the supplier, right, to obtain the safety data sheet or the material safety data sheet. We all know that it used to be the MSDS. Now it's become more standardized. And now we go under the SDS, the safety data sheet. So to make sure that we have all of our safety data sheets available for all chemicals, have reviewed them in order to know that we're safely working around chemicals that we're working on in the work site. And then these forms describe the hazards that the chemicals may present, right? It lists any type of precautions, any type of instructions for handling and storing it, using the substance, and then also outlines any types of emergencies, fire extinguishing, and then first aid procedures as well. Okay. The plan also has the list in detail the procedures to be taken by those employees who have to remain for essential operations like emergency shutdowns, or to go that are essential personnel that must stay on site until they can control the operation. This can include crane or mobile equipment operators. It can include riggers or any other personnel who may need to be brought in during emergency. In refineries, a lot of times it winds up being our operators and our operators, emergency responders, and some crew personnel as well. And then for emergency evacuation, the plan should also include the use of floor plans or workplace maps that clearly show the emergency escape routes and the safe refuge of the areas. Of course, the smaller the area, the easier it is to identify, right, where the muster stations are going to be. All employees have to be told what actions they're to take during an emergency. If their job is to evacuate, their job is to evacuate. If they're part of the emergency response team, they're part of the emergency response team. Okay. If they're part of the operators for the shutdown unit, they're part of the shutdown unit. Okay. Or rescue, or whatever the case is. The job site emergency action plan should be reviewed with employees initially when the plan's developed, whenever the employee's responsibilities under the plan change, or whenever the plan is altered. Okay. Those are the 3 times that we have to continuously review the program. And then it's always the best practice just to do annual refresher training as well. In addition to the elements previously discussed, effective emergency action plans have to provide detailed information about the chain of command, about communications, accounting for personnel, emergency response teams, training procedures, personal protection, medical assistance, and any type of security as well. Okay, so it's really imperative to remember, especially this chain of command, because chain of command, basically what it's going to do is it's going to establish so that no employees have doubts, right, or no personnel have doubts. who's making the decisions, who's got the authority to make the decisions in the site. So the chain of command could list the names of the individuals who are responsible, ultimate responsibility, or it could be the position as well. Okay, and at most existing industrial facilities, an emergency response team coordinator is selected to coordinate the work, right, for the emergency response team. That person is going to be the first person in the chain of command normally, because they're the ones that are going to be usually the highest ranking person that is left on the work site during the case of an emergency. Okay. And then, in addition to that, in larger organizations, there might be a plant coordinator in charge of the plant-wide operations. We might have a public relations person ensuring that the outside aid is called in as well. Under certain circumstances, when there's a great importance in all these functions, additional backup has to be arranged so that trained personnel are always available. Biggest thing to remember is this, folks, is that chain of command is going to be who's making the decisions, but chain of command could also be who's talking to the media, who's bringing in the emergency responders, okay, or who's providing necessary equipment or housing or lodging or security facilities while items get under control. Okay, so just dependent, folks. And then the duties of the emergency response team, the coordinator, they have to include the following, right? Assessing the situation and determining whether the emergency exists that requires activating the emergency procedures. Okay. How bad is it, right? Do we have to evacuate? Is it something that can be contained, or do we have to evacuate one area, or do we have to evacuate all areas and all personnel? Directing all efforts in the area, including evacuating personnel, right, and minimizing any type of property loss. But most important always is evacuating personnel, right, so that we minimize the injury, illness, or fatality of any personnel. And then ensure that outside emergency services, like any type of medical aid or local fire departments, are called in when necessary, or our own fire brigade and fire team, emergency response team. Directing the shutdown of plant operations when necessary as well. And then on grassroots construction projects, the contractor is going to have to implement a chain of command as part of the emergency action plan. Okay, the chain of command is going to be responsible. They've got to be flexible and work in conjunction with local law enforcement and emergency response personnel. Communications during any type of major emergency, any type of major response involving anything like a fire, explosion, it might be necessary to evacuate all portions of the site, right, including the offices. So sometimes we may have to evacuate one, like I said, one unit or one area, and sometimes it may be a plant-wide evacuation. Okay. Also, normal services such as electricity, power, telephones, they may be available, they may not be available. Okay. When in conditions when they're unavailable, it might be necessary to have an alternate area where employees can report, right, or they can act as a focal point for incoming or outgoing calls. Okay, because time's essential, right? Time's of the essence. In order for an adequate response, the person that designated as being in charge should make the alternate headquarters. Make this the alternate headquarters so one of them can be easily reached. Now that nowadays with so many radios on job sites, and then of course cell phones, it makes it a whole lot easier for us, right? So let's talk about emergency communication equipment for a moment. All right, things like perfect example, or portable radios or walkie-talkies, cell phones, PA systems, right? Public address systems should be present for notifying employees of emergency and for contacting any type of local authorities. All right, fire department, ambulance service, emergency response contractors, anybody necessary. If you notice, they talk about cell phones, right? Why? Because technology's changed. What you don't see in there is landlines anymore. Now, it doesn't mean they won't be used, but they're normally not considered emergency equipment anymore because we can't be on the run with them. Okay, so just remember, right? The three big ones nowadays are, radios, right? Any type of radio communications, cell phones, and then a PA system. Those are the three most common these days. And then a method of communicating is also needed to alert employees to the evacuation or to take other actions as required, right? A lot of times it might be audible alarms or visual alarms by all people on site, and they have to have auxiliary power supply in the event of any type of electricity failure. So if we have a PA system, or we have any type of alarm systems for chemical releases, or let's say for fire or whatever, they have to have a backup power supply. Okay. The alarm has to be distinctive and recognizable as a signal to evacuate the work area, or to perform actions designated under the emergency action plan, okay? And the employer's got to explain to each employee the means for reporting emergencies. Emergency phone numbers, they have to be posted near telephones, on employee bulletin boards, and any other obvious or conspicuous locations. The warning plan should be in writing, right? Or it must be in writing if it's greater than 10 people. And then must be sure each employee knows what it means and what action needs to be taken. And then an updated written list should be kept with key personnel, and then listed in order of priority, of course. So the most prioritized and most important phone numbers should be kept at the highest part of the list, or the most visible part of the list, with phone numbers, any key personnel, main offices, right, including daytime and after hour numbers, or positions or employees as well, or supervisors as well. So just keep in mind, folks, a perfect example of this is the Basic Orientation Plus for refineries. A lot of times, if anybody's gone to work in refineries, we've taken the Basic Orientation Plus, and what happens, they tell us all the different alarm sounds, right? What it'll sound like, long blast, whoop, whoop, long blast, or all long blasts, right? Or all whoops, or, all pulses. So depending if it's a material release, a fire, explosion, okay, depending on what the alarm is, will depending on what the emergency is, will depend on what the alarm is, okay? And then, of course, like we talked about earlier, accounting for personnel, right? Making sure that all persons that were on site that day working, that we have them accounted for. A lot of times, the best way to do that is having them on that JSA for the day, right? Or that TSA, task safety analysis, or the job safety analysis. And then, of course, knowing who's there and having contact phone numbers for all employees, for them, and for any family members as well, should we need to try to locate them because we can't locate them after an emergency. Okay. And then, of course, our emergency response teams, they're the first line of defense in emergencies a lot of times, right? So ERTs, you'll hear them called a lot, or rescue personnel, right? Fire brigade, whatever you want to call them. Emergency response teams, they're often the first line of personnel because they're already on site and they've been trained for those types of emergencies. They're even going to become first in relation to even like local fire or EMS as well. Okay, because those ERTs, or emergency response teams, are the ones that have been trained for that work environment. So before assigning personnel to the teams, the contractor's got to make sure that the employees, that they're physically able to do the job, right, and perform the duties. Okay, and then they can be assigned to doing them. We can't assign them and then determine if they're capable of doing it. We have to basically take performance evaluations first, basically assess them and determine, are they qualified to be on a rescue team? If not, we can't even assign them on there. Okay, are they able to? And then depending on the size of the facility, it may be one or even more teams, just depending, okay? And depending on the type of emergency as well. And then the use of various types of fire extinguishers, right? We have to be trained on. Are we on an ABC? Are we on a BC? So depending on fire extinguishers, as y'all know, we did a lot of fire extinguisher training information in the first book. So we talked about all the different types of fire extinguishers. And then first aid and CPR, confined space rescue, excavation rescue procedures, chemical spill control procedures, the use of any type of self-contained breathing apparatus or air supplied respirators. Okay, and then emergency rescue procedures for trenches or any type of high altitude or elevated locations, right? So make sure that we take all those considerations into place, and that we have, it can be the same team or multiple teams, but as long as we have teams that are trained, a team or multiple teams that are trained in order to respond to all of those emergencies. Okay. And then training, right? Why is training so important? Because it's got to be effective, right? I'm at 2.5.0, folks, on page 7.4. Okay, training's important in order to make sure that we can effectively execute our emergency action plan. So before implementing any type of action plan, we have to have a sufficient number of persons that are trained to assist in order to orderly evacuate employees, or to rescue employees, or to furnish uh, uh, medical assistance if necessary. Okay, training for each type of disaster response. It's necessary that employees know what actions are required. That's why it's so important to drill. In addition to specialized training for emergency response, team members, all employees should be trained on the following, right? All employees should be trained on evacuation plans, on alarm systems, on report and procedures for personnel, on shutdown procedures if they have a responsibility for it or that they should be evacuating, and then potential types of emergencies, right? So all employees should be educated on whatever the responsibilities are going to entail there, and then also the training programs have to be provided as follows. Initially, when the plan's developed, for all new employees. Okay, when new equipment, materials, or processes are introduced where there could be a significant difference or change, when procedures have been updated or revised and there's significant update or change, and when exercises show that employee performance has to be improved, right? And then also annually for emergency action plans. Okay, so the emergency control procedures, they have to be written in concise terms and they have to be made available to all personnel. Okay, a drill should be held for all personnel at random intervals, at least annually, right? So, an evaluation of the performance made immediately by management or by employees to make sure that we're doing it correctly. So we have to drill and practice to make sure that if that emergency ever happens, that we're adequately prepared, right? When possible, drills should include groups supplying outside services like fire, police departments, if possible. Um, on jobs with multiple contractors, the emergency plan should be coordinated so that other contractors and their employees as well are able to participate and actually know that it's a drill as well. And then also the emergency action plan should be reviewed periodically to update to maintain adequate response personnel, right, and program efficiency at least yearly, and even more so if necessary, right? So then, of course, PPE, right, folks? We also know that we have to have adequate PPE on site for our regular jobs, but also in order to respond or to evacuate during emergencies. It could be anything from any hazards like chemical splashes, right, or contact with toxic chemicals. It could be from falling objects or fine particulates or particles. It could be falls from elevations, unknown atmospheres that can contain toxic gases, vapors, mist, inadequate oxygen. So it could be inadequate oxygen or enriched oxygen, right? It could be explosive levels or flammable levels, and then it could be toxic chemicals as well, right? And that's the last bullet that I just covered, which is fires, and then also electrical hazards as well. Remember, it's definitely important that employees be adequately protected in these situations, right? We can't do any job if we don't have adequate protection, folks. Okay, response, emergency, rescue. It's just another job. It's a crucial job, but it's another job. So we have to be adequately trained and we have to be adequately prepared and adequately protected to do that job as well. Okay, if we're not trained, if we're not protected, and if we're not and if we're not prepared, we can't do the job. Okay. So different equipment also that's going to be required, right? Safety glasses, goggles, face shields for eye protection. Of course, hard hats, safety shoes for head and foot protection as well. Respiratory protection for breathing, chemical resistant suits, gloves, hoods, boots, body protection, items that we use on a regular day-to-day PPE task, and then also a task that require PPE, and then of course for emergencies, right? Body protection for abnormal environmental conditions, like high temperatures as well. So it might be like cool down vests or something like that. Then personal fall arrest, right? Like our anchors, body harnesses, connectors, decelerators, items like that. And then you see an illustration there on the bottom of page 7.5. You'll see there that different same thing, right? Glasses, safety goggles, glasses, goggles, earplugs, gauntlet gloves or regular work gloves or chemical gloves, hard hats, safety shoes. Okay, and then not only that, but we also know that the equipment's got to be approved by MSHA, by NIOSH, by ANSI, and by OSHA, right? And we know that most of our equipment, as long as it meets the ANSI standard or the NIOSH standard, and then it will meet the OSHA standard and the MSHA standard, which is Marine Safety and Health. Mine Safety and Health Administration. Okay, for MSHA. So So there you go. So there's all the different regulatory agencies and or consensus groups that our PPE must meet. Okay. And then, of course, let's talk about respirators for a little bit, right? So um, professional consultations would most likely be needed in providing adequate respiratory protection. A lot of times, employers will work with like an occupational medicine doctor or some type of respiratory specialist, right? And make sure that respiratory protection is necessary for toxic atmospheres of dust, mist, gases, vapors, any type of oxygen deficient atmospheres. And remember that there's four basic categories of respirators, okay? So let's talk about the four basic categories are. You got an air purifying device, like a filter, right? Like a gas mask, a chemical cartridge. And basically what it's going to do is it's going to remove contaminants from the air, but it can't be used in oxygen deficient atmospheres. And then it can't be used in certain toxic atmospheres. Okay. So that would be air purifying respirator. And then we have air supplied respirators, which should not be used in atmospheres that are immediately dangerous to life and health. Okay. So unless they're operated in a positive pressure mode and the equipment with an escape pack. Positive pressure basically means that it's constantly pushing a little bit of air towards us. So if there's any type of break in the seal around of our mask, if you look at page 7.7, if there's any type of in any of these four situations where there's any type of break in the seal around the mask, let's say where we have positive pressure, if you look at the top two, okay, both of those are air supplied. The two bottom ones are air purified. The top two that are air supplied, one of them is an airline, which is on the right. The one on the left is like a scuba tank, which is a self-contained. You carry the breathable air on your back. And the reason we want a little bit of positive pressure is so if there's a break of seal, it's pushing fresh air out rather than letting contaminated air or toxic air come in. Okay. And then, of course, also it could be SCBA, like we're talking about, self-contained breathing apparatus right now. They're required for unknown atmospheres, oxygen deficient atmospheres, or atmospheres that are IDL8, immediately dangerous to our life or health. So the highest protection level of protection, folks, is the SCBA that you see. Okay, that's the first highest level of protection. The second highest level of protection will be the supplied air mask. Okay, so those two are air supplied. So self-contained first, supplied air mask that comes on the airline would be the second option. And then when we talk about air purification, the full face respirator obviously is going to give us more protection because it also covers and protects our face, our full face and eyes, which we would use in something maybe like working around lead. Okay. And then of course your half mask as well. Okay. Where the employee still has safety glasses on as well, which is usually like for volatile organic compounds or air purification to get impurities out of our breathable air. Okay, and then the last one is also escape mask that a temporary devices use just to exit out. A lot of times you'll see an escape pack. Let me show you what I'm talking about with an escape pack, folks. I'm gonna go on the internet and check and show you one. Okay. This is what I'm talking about, folks. A lot of times you've probably seen them out there. Items like this, different ones. Might use them in chlorine units or something like this, or high H2S areas. Okay, so it'll be almost like a bag that you put over your face. They call it a 5 minute pack. Could be 5 minutes, could be more, could be less. The person, depending on how the person breathes, and they're called escape packs. Okay, so there's some different. Excuse me. There you go. There's some different examples of them. Okay, and then um, and then let's see, breathing. Okay, there you go. There's some different examples, folks, of escape packs. Okay. Okay, so before signing or using respiratory equipment, okay, the following conditions have to be met. Um, First of all, the employee has to have a medical evaluation, okay, and it's got to be made to determine if the employee is physically fit and physically able to use the respirator. Remember, the respirator is gonna go ahead and restrict a person's airflow because it's either purifying or it's supplying us with air. Okay. which is going to be normally less air than we're used to consuming on a regular basis, okay? We also have to have written procedures. We have to be prepared for covering safe use and proper care of the equipment, okay? And employees have to be trained in the procedures and the use of the maintenance of respirators as well. We have to be fit tested as well to determine the proper match between our face and the respirator that we're going to use to make sure that we get an adequate seal. Okay, this goes whether it's full face respirator, like the two bottom pictures on your right hand side on the other one, and actually in this case all four of them, to make sure that all four respirators that you see there are going to adequately fit our face, so that there's no break in the seal between our face and the mask. Okay, whether we use an air purifying respirators like the two bottom ones, or we're using air supplied respirators like the two top ones. And then also, in addition to that, we have to be regularly tested. We normally have to be fit tested every year. We're going to take the medical evaluation every 3 years. Okay. And then there's got to be a regular maintenance program that's got to be implemented, including cleaning, inspecting, and testing of all of our respiratory equipment, so we're trained and know how to adequately do it. Respirators used for emergency response, they have to be inspected after each use and at least monthly. Because remember, emergency response, we're not using them on a regular basis. So therefore, if they ever need to be used, they have to be inspected after we use them. They always have to be inspected before we use them, right? And then, but also monthly, okay, since we don't use them on a regular basis. And then distribution areas for equipment, right, used in emergencies must be readily accessible to employees. So if we have emergency packs in, let's say, one side of a refinery or on a drilling rig or fracking rig, exploration rig, well, our employees have to have access to them, right? If the risk exists and the equipment's there, they have to have access to it, okay? The same thing in different units or, manufacturing facilities, wherever we deem it's necessary. And like we said, a regular maintenance program, right, has to be instituted, like I just said. Respirators used for the emergency have to be inspected after each use, like we just talked about, and we just covered those distribution areas, okay? And SCBA, right, self-contained breathing apparatus, top left picture of page 7.7. Okay, it's going to offer the best protection. Why? Because we control the air. The air is on our back. We don't have to worry about a line being cut like an air supplied mask that's on the right. So let me show you the difference, folks, for anybody who's not familiar. I've done this in a couple other modules. I'm going to show it to you here too. SCBA versus SAR, supplied air respirator. Okay, so here's an example. SCBA, folks, is like what you see normally a fireman use or something like that. Okay, something like this where we're carrying it on our back. Okay, where we're carrying it on our back. We may or may not have an emergency pack like this with us as well. Okay, it's recommended, but it's not required. And then, of course, you have air supplied respirator, which is something like this, where we're all coming off of either equipment or air packs, fresh air packs. Okay, not oxygen, fresh air, right? Which is going to give us 20.8% oxygen, or 78.1% nitrogen, and 1.1% everything else. And these employees are all coming in. As you notice, each one of them have their own airline. Okay, but not only do they all have their own airline, they're all going to have a 5-minute or emergency pack as well. Okay, so on this one that you see here on the SAR, all right, it's a applied air respirator or air mask, whichever one you want to call it. You have an airline, but you also have an emergency pack or 5-minute pack on your hip. The reason this is not as safe as the SCBA, something like this, is because with the SCBA, we're carrying the air on our back, and we should be able to maintain the meter. Fireman's the best way I can explain it, okay? So we can monitor the air that's on our back, whereas with the SAR, if somebody inadvertently, and we've seen this happen before in some situations, right, in investigations, where employees' air has been inadvertently disconnected, the airline hose, or it's been severed or knotted, okay, which hopefully won't happen, but it's happened. And so employees have less of control, and all they have is that emergency pack to get out then. Okay. So let's see. And here you go. Here's a perfect example of SCBA of what I was talking about. I just wanted to get you to get a good look at it. Okay. There you go. All right. Some people don't realize these nowadays. Have gauges. The glass sights are not only on the side. Many of them now are in a mask, so they can look up and they'll be able to see what their air gauge is reading also in the mask. Right. Technology is a wonderful thing. Also, most of these tanks nowadays are no longer steel. The majority of them are aluminum now. So they've taken off a significant amount of weight off of that employee, off of that rescue personnel as well. Okay. So there you go, folks. Now you see what it looks like for SCBA, and like I said, air supplied, right? SAR. Like I said, it's going to be a whip and a line running in. Here you go. Actually, that's air purified, that one. And we'd be doing the let's see. Let me go back to it one more time. SCBA versus SAR. There you go again. Okay, what we're just talking about. Okay, and they're all coming in under. They're both under fresh air, except this one is second option, whereas the safest one is always going to be SCBA. They carry it with them. Okay. All right, good, folks. Okay, so let's go ahead and keep on moving on. And then also SCBA offers the best protection, like we just talked about. Conditions that require an SCBA. Now, these conditions require it, right? Leaking cylinders or containers, smoke from chemical fires, chemical spills that indicate a high potential for exposure to toxic substances, atmospheres with unknown contaminants or unknown contaminant concentrations, confined spaces that might contain toxic substances, or oxygen deficient atmospheres. Okay, and oftentimes that's where the IDLH, if you look on page 7.6 IDLH, you'll see it on the second bullet point on 2.6.1. Immediately dangerous to life and health. What that means is a lot of times people get that misconstrued with imminent danger. Imminent danger can be anything: a fall hazard, right? A crane that may be under excessive load, or people working under the load. That's working at heights without adequate fall protection. That's all imminent danger. But when we're talking about IDLH, we're talking about immediately dangerous to life and health. We're talking about the atmospheric condition. Okay. All right, great. So let's go ahead and move on, folks. We're going to go ahead and push through confined space, and we're getting close. We should be wrapping this up in about 10 minutes or so. Confined space. We did the map before on confined space. Let me pull it up for you again, folks. Let's see. Not the map. I'm sorry. The handout that we do for our trainees here in New Orleans. Let's see. Where's the conference presentations? This is what I'm talking about. I'm sure many of you remember we sent this one out via email, and I'll send it out again. Okay, and there's confined space, just different examples of confined spaces that may be a confined space, right? Within general industry and construction. There's some examples in the maritime industry. There's potential hazards as well. And then you'll see here are your acceptable atmospheric conditions, authorized entrance, the responsibilities. And this is all, folks, right here. All this right here, for anybody who's not familiar, this is all from the OSHA standards. This is 1910.146, and it's called the duties of the entrant, duties of the attendant, and duties of the supervisor. Okay. And then as you notice at the bottom here, folks, here is the definition. It takes these three things to be a confined space. And once it is a confined space, if it meets any of these four criteria here, it will be classified as a permit required confined space. Okay, so I'll leave that for you, and then I'm gonna, like I said, I'll be emailing that out again for everybody so you can take a good look at it. All right, so confined spaces, like we said, right, emergency situations that involve entering confined spaces and rescue personnel. The confined spaces include anything, any of these examples, tanks, vaults, right, or anything that you see up here on this sheet that's on your screen right now. Okay, and then the biggest concern is going to be three things. The employee's got to be able to, it's got to be large enough for the employee to bodily enter and perform their task. It's got to not be made for continuous occupancy, and it's got to have limited means of entry and exit. Not meaning the number of entries and exits, but meaning does the employee have to climb, scale, crawl through, contort their body, right? Anything other than a traditional means of entry or exit, or something where they cannot easily and promptly self-rescue or run out, okay? And then, of course, our greatest hazard is like you notice here on the permit required confined space, is contains a potential for a hazardous atmosphere. This is what we're talking about first of all, is your oxygen levels. If you notice, oxygen levels are normally 20.8. All right, ideal permissible limits, they have to stay within 19.5 and 23.5. If they go under or over, we have to evacuate. In maritime, it's 19.5 to 22.5. Excuse me, to 22. The reason it's 22 is because in maritime, conditions can change rather quickly. The area can become more enriched, and it can become more flammable, ignitable, okay, or explosive. And that's why, because the higher that the oxygen level becomes, the more we increase the risk of flammability or ignitability if we hit enough of the lower explosive limit chemicals, okay? And then there's your LEL. We want to stay under 10%. Zero is ideal. There's your H2S hazards, right? Zero, less than 10 parts per million. Anything above 60 to 80 parts per million, it starts to become immediately dangerous to life and health, ideal H. And then carbon monoxide as well, okay? So there's just some examples for you. So let's say if in a confined space, I'm going back to page 7.6 now. If a confined space has to be entered in an emergency, we want to take certain precautions, right? You know, all lines containing inerted, toxic, inflammable, or corrosive materials have to be disconnected or valved off before entry. And I'm talking about like off of a tank or off of a refinery or a unit or something like that. So we have to make sure that that all the gases. So let's go ahead and go to. Let me go and go to that here on the website. Let's see. So basically, if employees have to do an entry, let's say employees are going to have to do an entry into a unit, whatever sources of energy are going into that unit, we're going to have to control to make sure that the employees that are going to do the rescue are not in harm's way. Okay, so let's see right here, perfect example, right? There you go. Before employees go in, we need to make sure anything that's going to be pushing any type of gases or toxic atmospheres in, that we control those hazards. Okay, and that's a winch that you see there for retrieval is what that is. What you see in that picture right there. Okay, they're doing a horizontal retrieval. Okay, they're going to go ahead. That's a horizontal retrieval, and this is a vertical retrieval for anybody who's not familiar with it. Okay, it's just a tripod retrieval is what it is. Okay. Also, all impellers, agitators, or other moving equipment, they have to be locked out. So we're going to talk about have to go back into our lockout tagout process, depending on what's inside that unit or that piece of equipment, right? To make sure that no employee is going to get sliced, diced, ripped, twisted, whatever the case is. Augers, agitators, whatever the risk is. Okay. Okay. Also, employees must wear appropriate personal protective equipment, right, when entering the vessel. Mandatory use of safety harnesses should be stressed. So if they're going in vertical, especially vertical, but even horizontal, we want to have a safety harness. The reason we want to do a safety harness is so we can do exactly those retrievals that I just showed you right now. Okay. So there you go. There's your tripod again. You see it right there. So they can do a vertical retrieval or they can do a horizontal retrieval if necessary. Okay, and so that's why we want to make sure that they have their harnesses on. Okay, and there you go, perfect example. Okay, rescue procedures, they must be specifically designed for entry. When there's an atmosphere immediately dangerous to life and health, IDLH, right, or a situation where there could be potential injury, illness, unprotected workers. And workers have to be trained, and then, like we said, they have to go in an SCBA. Okay, they have to go into a self-contained breathing apparatus. Now, if you look at 7.8 at the very top, you'll see figure 4 there, and it says before using a respirator, we have to determine the following, right? We have to determine the type of contaminant for which the respirator is going to be selected. So we have to know what we're trying to guard against, because that way, for two reasons. What is the contaminant? Because we have to determine if we're going to go under forced air, okay, air supplied, right? Or if we're going to go under air purified, okay? The concentration level of the contaminant, because certain chemicals, benzene for perfect example, on low concentrations, we can still use our air purifying respirator. Okay. And then whether the respirator can be properly fitted to the wearer's face. So it's all three. So it's the type of contaminant that we're concerned about, all right, the concentration levels of the potential contaminant, and then whether the respirator can be properly fitted to the wearer's face. And we're talking about this ahead of time, not at the time of emergency. We're talking about this when the respirators are assigned to the employees, okay? All respirator instructions, warnings, and use limitations contained on each package also have to be read and understood by the wearer before use. I tell people this often with our PPE. How many times do we just grab it and use it? But no, we have to read the instructions, and preferably to go through some training, right, to make sure that we adequately understand the instructions and the requirements of what's going to be necessary. Okay. Um, let's see. And then more complete description of procedures to follow while working in confined spaces can be found in NIOSH, and there's a publication number. NIOSH stands for National Institute of Occupational Safety and Health. OSHA protects our safety, EPA protects our environment, NIOSH protects our health. Okay, and all three of them, that's how we get the HSE or the EHS suite, whatever you want to call it. Okay. And then medical assistance in a major emergency. You remember, time is critical. So what do we have to do? Most contractors, we have to have a formal medical program, right? Normally we don't have a formal medical program, but we have to have one available to make sure that we have adequate for services available, medical services and or first aid CPR services available. If you look at the first bullet point there, that's what I was talking about earlier, which is in the absence of an infirmary, clinic, or hospital, right? We have to make sure that at least one person is first aid trained, okay? First aid CPR, AED trained to render first aid and CPR, okay? Where the eyes or the body employees might be exposed to harmful corrosive material, we have to have provided eye wash stations and body wash stations. The employer also has to ensure that readily available medical personnel for advice or consultations. A lot of times we do that by having on-staff nurses, working with occupational medicine doctors, okay, that are on call. So that's the easy way for employers to cover that base. And then to fulfill the requirements that were listed above, we have to have the following to be considered, okay? We have to have a medical evaluation survey. We have to survey their near medical facilities to make sure that we know where near medical facilities are. We have to have a written emergency medical procedure, okay? And it's got to be prepared for handling accidents at a minimum with minimal confusion. If the job's located far from medical facilities, like we said, at least one person's got to be first aid CPR trained. In most situations, they will accept Medic First, American Red Cross, and American Heart Association, and a couple others. Just make sure with your client or in your area to make sure which first aid CPR AED training is acceptable. Okay. Also inform all personnel about the hazards of bloodborne pathogens, and the need to follow universal precautions, right? When it comes, always assume that bodily fluids are infectious until we can prove that they're not, right? First aid supplies have to be provided for an emergency use. The equipment should be ordered through consultation with a physician, right? If it's beyond first aid. Emergency phone numbers should be posted in conspicuous areas, also on work permits, perfect example. Sufficient ambulance service should be available. If not, again, we get into the first aid and CPR and AED, and then evaluate the need for an AED and see if it's feasible and if it's possible to have an AED available, okay? Anybody who wants some additional information on AED, just look up here where it says, did you know, on the top of page 7.9, and that's just more some tidbits for your personal information and for greater knowledge. So I'll go ahead and leave that for you to go ahead and read at your leisure. Okay. And then of course maintaining security, right? We want to make sure that we control and coordinate off the work area, rope signs, control the hazards, keep unauthorized personnel out. We also account for authorized personnel and anybody who may be potentially and at risk, right, of being injured, ill, or a fatality, and make sure that we keep that head count and take accountability for all of our employees, right? And then pre-planning for specific types of emergencies. Just remember, we have to pre-plan, right? And then also on top of the ones that we already talked about, also got to pre-plan for any type of trapped workers, Also, severe weather, bomb threats, fire emergencies. So, trapped workers, what are we often talking about? High heights, right? Scaffolds that may partially collapse, or for some reason, employees may not be able to come back down. Being on top of structural steel, maybe employees, for some reason, are stuck and unable to come back down. Confined spaces like sewers, manholes, processing tanks, vaults, any type of confined space that we noted on this. Let me see where it is, folks. On this page right here. Okay. Trench cave-ins, and then cranes that make contact with energized or electrical parts. So we have to make considerations and make sure that we have all that. Also for severe weather, right? Are we at risk of a tornado? Are we at risk of severe thunderstorm that may come in last minute where it could possibly cause harm or risk to employees, right? What about bomb threats and workplace violence? Okay, we've seen this more and more now. So it could be workplace violence, disgruntled employee, disgruntled previous employee, competitor, or a random act of violence, okay, or bomb threats themselves, okay. And then fire emergencies as well, right? Fires, explosions, hazards that we've continuously talked about. And then here's some key OSHA requirements for fire protection in construction sites. Let me show you something, folks, before we go any further. Let me bring you to Google. And let me see which one I want to bring you to. Give me 1 second. Okay, here. I opened up a page in Google, and this is what I did. I did OSHA EAP PDF. So basically what I'm doing is I'm doing OSHA Emergency Action Plan PDF, but I'm going to go a step further, folks. I'm going to show you a little bit of advanced search. I've showed y'all this in other modules, but I'm going to show it to you here for some of the newcomers. If you type in the word file type and colon, FILETYPE colon, and then PDF all together, you see everything right here? Okay. First of all, let me get rid of this. Okay. I'm just going to cut it out. Okay. So let's say I just do Ocean EAP. You see that there? And I hit enter. As you'll notice, it starts coming up with everything, right? OSHA talking about emergency action plans. All right. Most of it's government on the first page. And then you start getting into educational outlets and resources, consultants, training companies, things that we do or other educational outlets do or consultants do. Okay. Or companies. Okay. So, but this is what I'm going to do now. Now I'm doing OSHA EAP. And then I typed in behind it. I just cut and paste it back in right now just for convenience. I typed in file type colon PDF, and now I'm gonna search again. And what I basically did is I told it that every document that I want, as you see here, is a PDF. Okay, so you can do this with anything you're looking for if you know you're looking for a specific PDF. So now what I'm doing is that now how to plan for emergency workers. Here's the OSHA publication. Let me see how many pages this one is. This one is a 25-page publication on how to plan for emergency action planning. Okay, so you've got that resource there from OSHA. We've got some great tools here. Okay, you've got the OSHA eTools also. This is a PDF of it. OSHA eTools stands for electronic tools, internet tools. Goes in and gives you a bunch of if and then scenarios, but this is actually the PDF version of it. But you also have the OSHA eTools on their website as well. Okay, starts asking you questions. You can start going through different answers, different work evaluations, and items like that. Okay. All right, and then you have this one right here, emergency action plans. Okay, it starts talking about an emergency action plan, starts giving us a sample of what we need to include in our emergency action plan as well, okay? And it even gives us a sample emergency action plan of what needs to be covered, okay? So all that's in there for you folks. I just kind of wanted to show that to you since we were talking about this tonight. Now I'm going to go one step further here, and I'm going to type in the word fact sheet. And the reason is because OSHA does a lot of fact sheets and a lot of quick cards. I know many of you already knew that. Some of you have learned it during these webinars. Now I'm doing it again and I'm checking, and I want to show you two of them. First of all, this one right here, the fact sheet. This is just a quick 2-page, okay, gives us some additional notes on planning, emergency response teams, right? Response activities, the chain of command, okay, medical assistant and training. You see, and PPE, right? A lot of items that we talked about that you saw tonight in the book. And then this one right here, what is an exit route? This one actually talks about exit routes, how many routes that we need within a workplace. Okay, what are some other designs or construction requirements for exit routes, right? Our employers required to have emergency action plans, and that's where it goes into the 10 or fewer that we talked about earlier today. It even goes on to tell us all different types of risk, and it even notes all the standard numbers that we can reference if we want to go to it, okay? And all the way down to certain definitions as well. So this 3-page EAP right here for emergency exit routes, I use quite often. I would definitely recommend that you guys read that, okay? And it's there for you. So again, this is how I got to it. OSHA EAP fact sheet file type : PDF, and it's this one right here that says what is an exit route. Okay. All right, great. So now let's go back to the book. Okay, we're talking about fire emergencies. Let's go ahead and wrap up these bullet points on fire emergencies and dealing with the media, and then we will go ahead and shut this module down as well. Okay, so fire emergencies, like we said, listed are some key OSHA requirements, right? So access to all available firefighting equipment has to be maintained at all times, right? Basically, if we have a static facility, a facility that we use all the time, and there's a fire truck or fire brigade, it's always got to be available, right? If that's what it's there for. If it's designated for the facility or for that group or area, it's got to be there. All firefighting equipment has to be periodically inspected, and it's got to be maintained in operating condition. Okay, we're gonna have to inspect it prior to every use, after every use, and at least monthly. Okay, as warranted by the project, the employer shall provide a trained and equipped firefighting organization, so a fire brigade or an emergency response team, either one, right? And they have to be adequately trained and selected. A temporary or permanent water supply with sufficient volume, duration, and pressure. So it could be fire hydrants, it could be out of a lake or a pond with compressors and generators. So just depending on what it wanted to be sufficient and necessary for our facility. Where underground water mains, are to be provided, they have to be installed, completed, and made available for us as soon as practical. Fire extinguishers, right, not rated less than 2 pounds, have to be provided for each uh, excuse me, uh, not rated less than 2A, have to be provided in construction for every 3,000 square feet. Okay, and we cannot travel more than 100 feet to access a fire extinguisher. Okay, so a fire extinguisher has to be available, at least one minimum, for every 3,000 square feet. But at the same time, we have to be able to access it within any 100 feet of travel. And then one or more fire extinguishers not rated less than a 2A have to be provided on each floor of multi-story buildings. At least one fire extinguisher has to be located adjacent to the stairway as well. Okay, so it's going to have a designated fire extinguisher at a stairway, and it's going to be in the path to exit. So if we're in a basement and we have to travel up to get out, the fire extinguisher would be down at the bottom. If we're on a second floor and we have to travel down to get out to the first floor, and then it would be up on the second floor. Okay, so it's always in the path to travel to get us to the exit. A fire extinguisher not rated less than 10 pounds has to be provided within 50 feet. A B, so B is going to be for a fire extinguisher for for chemical fires. A is for like wood and ash and light plastics. B is for chemicals and liquids. Within 50 feet, whenever we have any more than 5 gallons of a flammable combustible liquid. Okay. Fire extinguishers have to be inspected periodically, which is normally monthly, and they're being inspected and documented. And then they have to be annually tested, and they have to be maintained in accordance with the maintenance and the use of a portable fire extinguisher for the NFPA. Okay, and there's the standard number for NFPA. During demolition involving combustible materials, charged hose lines supplied by hydrants, fire trucks with pumps or equivalent have to be made available. So we have to have, even during demolition, right, we have to have some type of fire protection and prevention available. Okay. If the facility being constructed includes the installation of an automatic sprinkler system, the installation has to closely follow the construction and be placed in service as soon as practical that laws permit. But in the meantime, folks, we still need fire extinguishers, or we still need some type of pump trucks or something there readily available to put out any fire. Okay. During demolition and alterations, existing automatic sprinklers installations have to be retained in service as long as reasonable, right? But if not, we still have to have fire extinguishers available, right? And we always have to have those fire extinguishers available if we don't have some type of standpipe or fire sprinkler systems available. Okay, and all structures in which standpipes are required, and I'm going to show you the standpipe. Let me show you now, folks, for anybody, because I want to make sure that everyone knows what I'm talking about. And you've probably seen it very often, just didn't realize what it was called. This is what I'm talking about. Any type of systems like this that you often see in buildings. Okay, you often see it like this coming into buildings, and then sometimes on the outside of a building you might see this. And what this is that basically they can open this up. The fire department can open this up, hook up their hose there, and it will go ahead and shoot the sprinkler systems. Some of them have their own water system already activated in them for like a sprinkler system, an activated sprinkler system. And then certain standpipe systems like this are actually empty. And what happens is the fire department will come plug in, and it will start running water to whatever floors or to whatever areas that they need. Okay, so there's an illustration, kind of how it's mapped out often. Okay, and like I said, if you need to look it up, folks, here you go. Here's what it would kind of be doing without the building being visible. Fire department's hooking up here, they're opening it up, and now that's how the fire department's getting water to all the sprinkler heads on the inside if it's not under its own water power. Okay. It's called standpipe systems, fire standpipe systems, if anybody needs to know how to pull it up. Okay. An alarm system has to shall be established by the employer, whereby the employees on the site and the local fire department can be alerted, right? Fire pull stations, fire alarms, heat sensors, stuff like that, monitored. Okay. And then alarm code. The alarm code and reporting instructions shall be conspicuously posted at phones and at the employee entrances, right? So that way employees can contact 911, alarm company, supervisors, whatever needs to be contacted. Okay. And then remember this, and this is where we're going to close out for this session, folks, is dealing with the media. Okay. What do they often want to know? What happened? Was anyone hurt? Why did it happen? How did it happen? How's the community going to be affected? Are there any families infected, right? Are there any employees affected? How's the construction company going to fix it? Okay. Who's in charge, right? Were there any hazards that we first were aware of? Okay. Was it reported to anyone? Easiest thing to do is do this. Just keep in mind that you might not have the answers, and we may not be the person authorized to give the answers. Okay. Let's go back to the chain of command that we saw earlier. In the chain of command, it's going to advise who is allowed in the workplace to talk to the media. The easiest thing to do at this point, because we may not have the responsibility or the authority to talk to the media or to anyone about a work situation, not our opinion, a work situation. Easiest thing to do and the safest thing to do so that we don't put out inaccurate information and so that we don't violate corporate policy, right, or put anyone else in danger, is to advise the media or anyone asking questions to talk to the public relations officer, all right, or to talk to the media relations officer, or recommend them to the plant manager, the site director, the owner of the company, or whatever. And it's so much easier than answering questions that we may wind up finding out that we start getting ourselves into a pigeonhole and answering or giving opinions of items that maybe we're not certain about. Okay. Okay. And then keep this in mind, right? Additional guidelines for dealing with the media. Know the company policy. And it's going to probably be something like what I just discussed. Only provide the information that you're allowed to give. If there's a company spokesperson, right? Like I said, media relations, right? Emergency response relation personnel, liaison. Be polite and advise them to speak to that person or to that department or to a supervisor. Of course, express concern for the safety and well-being, right, of any injured personnel. I mean, none of us want to be in that position. None of us want to be that family member, or even that coworker, right? Be prepared, if you're to provide the information, and be certain to provide only the facts, Don't lie, and don't offer opinions if you don't know. One of the worst things I think we can do in the workplace is speculate, right? Say that you don't know when you don't know. Of course, let's be polite. Let's be helpful. Let's maintain control, right? Don't answer leading questions, right? Leading questions like, oh, well, we saw smoke come from the street. Is it true that there was smoke coming from the street? If you don't know, you don't know, folks. Okay. It's a whole lot easier to say you don't know. I need to speak to a media relations director. I don't know if I'm authorized to say anything. Plus, I don't know what I can say. And, and in everybody's best interest, I'd rather you speak to a supervisor or manager or the media relations so that I don't say something that was not accurate. Okay. Maintain control. Don't answer leading questions. Be professional. Don't make jokes. Right? It's not a funny situation. I mean, if the media is there, chances are that there's something that really went down bad. Never make off the record statements. Okay. I recently had somebody that wanted to quote me on something, and I said no, because it was a situation where there was a fire in our community, and they were asking me about air quality and PSI of what was in a pipeline, and I know from common practices about how many PSIs are normally in a gas pipeline, but I don't want anybody quoting me on it. I don't work for that company. I don't know their practices. I can't verify it. So therefore, that's what I told her. I don't want me quoted on it. What I do is a lot of general training, right? Um, don't never release the names of any workers involved. I'd say never release the names of any employees, period. They have a right to privacy, just like we want it. Avoid discussion of any type of legal questions. We're not a legal professional. Don't accept responsibility or admit liability for the incident. How can we, right? If we're not qualified to do the job and we're not qualified to do the investigation, how can we accept any responsibility or liability for it? Stress the company's commitment to safety. Of course, in most companies we do have a strong commitment to safety. I think we just need to, be a little bit more polished and groomed, right? Keep reporters out of hazardous areas. If it's an area where they're possibly blocking where employees are coming out, ask them to step back, ask them to move away. They may be becoming a greater hazard. They may be putting themselves in harm's way, right? Let's get them further back. Let's have someone work with them from our organization in order to get them to somewhere safely to where they can go ahead and investigate and question and inspect if and whatever they're allowed to do, right? Keep track of who you talk to. If you talk to a certain person or a certain channel, or a certain media outlet group, just make sure you know so you can report it to your employer, or if you're quoted saying something, you know who you actually spoke to. And then in the interview, when you've covered the subject, right? So, like I said, the biggest thing is don't overspeak it, don't overstate it. And when you don't know, you don't know. And most companies nowadays, they tell us that they're going to have a point person or someone designated to speak to the media. And that's who we're going to report them to. That's my job, and that's what I'm going to do. My main concern is not to make sure that nobody's harmed in the workplace, right? And hopefully to be able to try to minimize any significant impact. Okay, so folks, that does it for section 7. Like I said, when we come back on Thursday, we're going to go back to section 6, module 6, excuse me, and that looks like it's going to pretty much take us all night on Thursday. Okay, so everybody have a great night. Talk to you in a couple of days, and we will be posting this for anybody who missed it up on the internet in the next day or so. So they will be able to capture modules 5 and module 7. Okay. Have a great night and have a safe day at work tomorrow. Thank you.